The art of living well. What helps more, having the right values or the right virtues? Our culture today makes a lot about values. We talk a lot about having the right values, and if we could just get kids and people in society to have the right values, society will flourish. Everybody will be happy. And yet, there's a problem with having the right values. What is it? It's that it doesn't always translate into the right life, the right actions. Let me give you an example. I highly value aviation safety. I fly a lot, and I'm deeply grateful for all the pilots and mechanics who have made all my flights safe. But just because I value aviation safety a great deal doesn't mean you want to get in the plane if I'm the pilot, or if I had been the mechanic checking on the engine and making sure that the plane was ready. In other words, just because I value aviation safety doesn't make me a great pilot. We could use another metaphor, an athletic one. I love baseball, and I'm a big St. Louis Cardinal fan, and they have a great pitcher, Adam Wainwright, who has an incredible curveball. I value his curveball. I love it. That doesn't make me any better at pitching just because I value and watch him and talk about how great of a pitcher he is. So talking about values, talking about the things that matter to us, doesn't necessarily make us better at living them. We could say that we value fidelity in marriage, but without the virtue of chastity, we won't be faithful in marriage. We could say that we value honesty, but if I don't have the virtue of courage, I won't tell the truth when I'm under stress and pressure. We need to have more than values. We need to have virtues. What is a virtue, and how do virtues help us to live life well? That's the question of the show tonight. I'm really excited about the topic tonight, the story of values versus virtues and what a virtue is. And I'm really pleased because I have a good friend of mine, an old friend, Dr. Edward Sri, who's going to be on the show with me tonight. He is a theologian, author of many, many wonderful books. In fact, he has a recent book, which is why I thought about having him on the show tonight, and it's called The Art of Living, the Cardinal Virtues and the Freedom to Love, published by the Augustine Institute and Ignatius Press. It's a new book. I highly recommend it. We're going to be talking about elements of this book. And Dr. Ted Sri, what a joy to have you on the show tonight.
Great to be back. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, you know, and I know you're the Vice President of Formation at Focus. You're a professor here at the Augustine Institute. You're a great theologian and an even better friend. So we're going to talk about virtue. What is it? You could write on a lot of different topics, and there's a lot of pressing issues today. What led you to write this book?
You know, the title really comes from something Pope Benedict said. So years ago, when he was just Cardinal Ratzinger, he gave an address, and he talked about how in the modern world, we haven't just lost like faith and lost catechesis and understanding of Christianity. I mean, there's a crisis there, of course, but we've lost the basics of how to live. He said we've lost the art of living. And what we need to do in the new evangelization is be able to teach people, again, just the art of living. So what do I mean by that? What does he mean by that? I mean, just the basics of how to live life well, how to live friendship well, how to live dating relationships, marriage, how to raise children. How do I give the best of myself to my God, you know, and all that God entrusts to me? That requires, as you said in your introduction, not just like, oh, I value God, I value my wife, I value my kids. You know, it requires a lot of virtue so that I can put my values into practice.
You know, it's so important. I know Cardinal Ratzinger mentioned that, gave that speech in the year 2000. And today that's even more true than back then. If you look at half of marriages fail, right? And people go in valuing marriage or they wouldn't get married. And yet they fail. And that's where the idea of the disconnect between a value and a virtue, that's really important. So let's just talk for the audience simply. How would you simplify an understanding of what a virtue is?
Yeah, I would just take it right from the Catechism. You know, Catechism 1803 describes what virtue is. Virtue is a habitual disposition to do the good. So it's a part of me. You know, it's not just like I appreciate something, which is a value. So I place this in high esteem. This is important to me. That's good. But a virtue actually is a part of who I am. I like to think of it as maybe, you can think of it as like the basic life skills that we need to live life well, to live with excellence, to live particularly the relationships that God's entrusted to us. So if I want to just be a good friend, I need a lot more than just like a noble desire, a sincere intention. Or if a young man's falling in love with someone, he needs a lot more than just those warm feelings, a romantic attraction. He needs virtue. I mean, I know to be a good husband. Like, I value my wife, I love her, and I really want to be a good husband to her, but I know my lack of virtue keeps me from loving her the way she deserves to be loved. To the extent that I, possess generosity or courage or prudence, I will do generous, courageous, and prudent things that, can bless the people around me. But I also know that when I am imprudent, I just make a rush decision. That doesn't just affect me, it affects Beth. It's like, why didn't you think through that? And now she has to pick up the pieces. Or when I lose my patience with my kids, I know that I'm not able to love them the way I want to love them. Or if I'm selfish, I'm not able to be a good friend to the people in my life. So the virtues really are so connected to friendship. And if I want to be a friend of God, first and foremost, which is what we're all called to do, or friends with each other, friends with my family, then I need to grow in virtue so that I can have the interior freedom to be able to love the people in my life.
We talk a lot about values in our culture today, as I mentioned already, but the ancient Romans and Greeks spoke a lot about virtues. They didn't talk about values. And throughout the 2,000-year Catholic tradition, in our Catholic culture, in our Catholic tradition, when you think of great thinkers like Augustine or St. Thomas Aquinas, the Catholic tradition focused on virtues. Why do you think our culture focuses so much on values rather than virtues, and is that a problem?
Oh, it's a serious problem. There's a big movement, as you know, back in the 70s in particular, called values clarification. This was all the rage in educational philosophy, parenting philosophy, and it kind of stems from the Enlightenment, the idea that we should just clarify our values. If we can just come into a room, agree upon what we value in society, then we can all go run after that together. And if you could just help young people to clarify for themselves what their values are. So I don't know if you ever went on these. I remember going on a goofy high school retreat once, and there was this, looking back on it.
I've been on some goofy high school retreats, but go ahead.
It is values clarification is what I experienced. Was like, okay, so what are your values about? Do you like chocolate or vanilla? What do you value about? Do you like baseball or football? Then it's like things like, well, how about abortion or pro-life? Or premarital sex, or wait till you're married. And all of a sudden you're putting on significant moral weighty issues that define who you are.
Yeah, like chocolate and vanilla.
Chocolate and vanilla, exactly. So it's seriously problematic, to just look at values. Because, and even if you get the values right, I think that's the key here. Even if you do value the right things, that doesn't mean you're going to live according to it.
I think that's so important, Ted, because I think a lot of people think, we talk about virtue signaling right now. People think that if they have, which is different than having virtues. Virtue signaling is all about values, really. But the idea is, I think a lot of people think that if they have the right values, therefore they're morally strong, that they're in the right place. And we know from our Catholic tradition and from the Greco-Roman tradition that having the right values doesn't mean you're a righteous person or a moral person, does it?
Oh, absolutely. Spot on there, because I think today it's easier to just say I value these things than actually to live virtuously.
Yeah.
Right. So whether it's you self-define as progressively liberal, or you self-define as like I'm a super orthodox, traditional Catholic. You can fall into the virtue signaling thing and fall into just values. Either way. So the progressive person might talk all about, we have to care for people. So I go to I buy my tea from this, local grocer who gets it from this, farmer in Guatemala, and I'm making a difference by spending $5 on this tea to help that Guatemala farmer. I love the farmer in Guatemala. That's awesome. But the real question is, are you serving that poor guy on the street in your neighborhood?
Right, that you pass by and ignore
every day.
Yeah, or a relative who needs help and you just don't have time for them. No, that's so important, Ted, because I think we see this all the time, and the kind of hypocrisy that comes from virtue signaling, which is just the idea of value, focusing on just values, right? So people could say, I love the environment, but then they fly their private jet, right? And they have a huge carbon footprint, but they tell us that we shouldn't have a carbon footprint. So now I want to invite everybody in the audience to join our conversation. If you have questions about values versus virtues, what a virtue is, a particular kind of virtue, please let us know. You can text in your questions at our text line, which is 720-650-0100. So please give us your name and maybe where you're from, and then give us your question for Dr. Sri or for myself. We'd love to hear your questions. We'd love to have you join the conversation. And again, that text line is 720-650-0100. Love to have you join the conversation. Well, let's talk a little bit now about a practical example. I know you love soccer, and there's better sports, I believe, like baseball, but that's all right, Ted. You're my friend, so I'm gonna be kind to you in this.
You like things that are slower.
Let's use an athletic example of soccer, and as an example for virtues. You talk about virtue as an excellence, as a habitual disposition, and a habit. Let's just flesh that out with an athletic example, and you can go ahead and feel free to use soccer if you want to.
I'll use a fun example right from, the audience needs to know you and I live in the same neighborhood, so there's a little park right by us, Altair Park, and I often will organize these soccer games. You've passed by and you see me, I'm an old guy out there, but I'm playing, I've got friends from the Augustine Institute, friends at Focus, young people there, and then my kids play, and then other kids play, so it's really just a lot of fun. But I'll tell you, my boys are really good at soccer. They've had a lot of great training. They have amazing touch. Like my two sons can juggle like over 1,000 times. And you give them the ball on the field, they're gonna do great things with it. They're gonna make a look up, make a good pass, they're gonna score. It's just awesome. You give the ball to me, I love the game, I value it, but I don't have the skills, I don't have the same kind of touch, so it's like 50-50. So maybe I'll make a good play, but at crucial moments in the game, I could tell. This has just happened, we played this summer, and I could tell my teammates they looked, they saw I was open, but they didn't pass the ball to me. I wouldn't pass the ball to me, because I wouldn't be reliable. And I guess that's what I want to think about with virtue here, is that when we grow in virtue, we become men and women who are reliable, people we can depend on. People that that others can count on. That's what I want. I want to be like that for my wife and for my kids.
So it's not enough then because somebody was honest yesterday to say that they have the virtue of honesty. In other words, like to say you're a good soccer player.
I scored once doesn't make me Cristiano Ronaldo.
Making it one good pass and 5 bad passes doesn't mean you're a good passer. So it's about consistency.
Yeah, exactly. In fact, the tradition has those 4 key characteristics of virtue that you need. Consistency is one of them. So it's it's a habitual disposition. You're doing it consistently. But secondly, you're also doing it with ease. It's like I might make the pass, but it's not like my kids make it look easy. It's just like second nature. For me, it's not easy. Thirdly, you do it promptly. And then fourthly, you do it with joy. Many times when I make a bad pass, there's not a lot of joy when I'm playing on the soccer field.
I love that. And you, by the way, break that out beautifully here in your book, The Art of Living. I just want to highlight that for the audience because I think you do a great job of going through these step by step so people can understand and you flesh out what does it take to have a virtue, right, with those different dispositions and those aspects.
Yeah, no, that's what we really just see. It's not about just doing one thing right one time. It becomes really a part of you. But then the idea of growing in virtue. How do we
grow?
How do we actually I want to be better. I want to grow in virtue. How do I do that? And again, the church just lays out like there's 3 key things that we all need to do. First is we have to educate ourselves in the virtue, learn more about them. We learn about them. We can do reading a good book, reading the lives of the saints, living in a virtuous community. I mean, I look back thinking about our graduate school days together and all the fun we had, but it was just being with great guys, with you and Curtis Martin and Sean Annhurst and Scott Hahn. It was virtuous friendship. I mean, I grew in virtue by studying virtue and reading Aquinas, but I also grew in virtue by being with other great virtuous men. So we have to. That's how we learn about the virtues. The second thing is we have to put a lot of effort into it. We try. We go after. Okay, if I know.
And that's really a big distinction because values don't take a lot of effort.
Oh, no.
Right? But a virtue takes a lot of work and it takes a lot of time to acquire a virtue, whereas a value can come in a minute.
Oh, yeah. When you're going after virtue, you realize, okay, I've got this weakness, and so I have to go against my natural inclination. So let's say I just like to eat a lot. So I have to okay, I'm going to try to not eat so much right now, or I talk a lot. So I'm gonna, you know what? I'm gonna, when I'm with others, I'm gonna ask them questions. let them talk, you know. Or I worry too much about other people.
Which is so hard. I mean, I had a friend who had a T-shirt that said, "Help me, I can't shut up." And it's easy to say you want to listen and you value listening, but to actually do it.
Yeah, well, what you're doing is you're going against what your natural inclination is. Maybe if you're too quiet and your spouse wants you to talk, like you actually have to get out of yourself. And I've heard of many wives that say, "I wish my husband would open up more." Like that's more virtuous to actually learn to talk more. So it all depends on like where you are, but you're often going against your particular weakness, and that's hard. And that's why the third thing is you need grace. You have to. In the end, you can study all the virtues, you can try as hard as you might, but in the end, you're going to run up against your own limitations, and we have to learn to rely on God's grace. And call in His grace through prayer and the sacraments to help us.
St. Augustine's such a great model of that. You know, we just had his feast day on August 28th, and he wanted chastity, and he strove for it. He tried to have it, but he ended up having to pray for God's grace and beg God to give him the grace, to give him the strength that he didn't have on his own to acquire that virtue, right? Well, Steve asks a great question on our text line, and he says, can you define what virtue signaling is? So, can you define what I brought it up, but I'll let you define it.
Yeah, I don't know if there's like a textbook definition. At least that's not in Aquinas because it's not there. But you know, but I would put it actually as a vice. I would put it under vanity, where you're too worried about what other people think of you. The vain person is seeking vain glory. So I want the praise of men, as opposed to the virtuous person just wants to be excellent, wants to be virtuous, to seek God's glory. So whether I get any applause from anyone else, anyone notices, doesn't matter. Right. I just want to do the right thing, because that's who I am.
For the sake of what's right.
For the sake of what's good.
Not for the sake of an audience or applause.
Exactly. Whereas the whole virtue signaling thing is I'm looking around going, okay, well, I better say this or act this way or wear this to signal to others so that they think of me in a certain way, you know, I'm making a message, you know, like, oh, maybe you should be doing this too, and I'm better than you. So there is.
Do you think that there's a reason that virtue signaling has arisen in the age of social media, particularly? Do you think that's connected?
Oh, I think virtue signaling would have been there, but it's certainly so much, has dramatically increased because of social media, right? Because once again, I can just pull up my phone and I can go, take a picture of myself, saying I'm doing some great thing, but they don't know that the rest of the day, I yelled at my wife and I was just selfish. I got up late or whatever. They don't really know that. You know, they just see like this nice picture I took. I was in the chapel. Like again, it could be. It doesn't have to be like a liberal thing. It could be, a conservative Catholic thing. I'm here and I'm in the chapel and I'm praying, or I'm here doing this thing with my kids. There's a lot of just this projecting, that's out there in social media. Especially the younger generation is just caught up in living out here, signaling to others, this is who I am, as opposed to just
it's
focusing
almost
on
as
being.
if we think of virtue signaling as a virtue, right? As a good thing in and of itself, and that's not the case. Like you're trying to show.
Not at all.
Yeah.
No. We want to be virtuous men and women, not worrying about signaling. I mean, the great saints weren't worried about what other people thought of them.
Yeah.
They weren't trying to draw attention to themselves.
Yeah. Jean asked a question, and I think this is a good question because I think there's a lot of confusion out there about what a virtue is and the distinction between virtues and values. And so Jean asks, is it virtuous to just focus on being a good person?
Is it virtuous to just focus?
Yeah, to just focus on being a good person.
Well, I think there's many things you need to focus on in life. So that's the word "just" that so I'm just parsing that out. But it's certainly a virtuous thing to try to be a good person and to try to be better for the sake of others. Maybe that's another way of looking at it. Is you could be introspective and just focused on self. Well, I'm just I'm all about self-improvement for the sake of myself. Like that's not healthy. But I'm thinking about it more like, again, my wife just needs Edward III to be a better man every day. And my children need me to be a better man. You need me to be a better man. Like I just need to grow in virtue. So that I hope that's not self-centered because I'm thinking about it. I mean, I want to love God with all my heart, so I want to grow in virtue.
Yeah. And isn't it true that people might pursue virtue or want to be good or to be holy, but that doesn't mean they're virtuous. It means they're on the path to pursue virtue. But virtue itself is really a habitual disposition. It's acquiring the right, not only attitude, but action that's embodied.
Yeah, and there's degrees of this, right? We're all, I mean, I think we're all works in progress. We're all growing in virtue. Hopefully we're moving in the right direction. So it's not as if I'm ever going to reach, you know, my full perfection here in this life. At least, you know, I'm assuming I need more help in purgatory. You know, I want to limit that as much as possible. I want God's grace to transform me here. But yeah, it is something we should be progressively.
You mentioned that desire to grow in virtue and practice and things, and I think that's great because David asks, you know, how can I start practicing the virtues? So, and you addressed that in this book, so why don't you give us some examples of how do people say, okay, I want to become more virtuous, maybe, and maybe we could talk about a particular virtue as an example of how to grow in a virtue.
Yeah, I mean, first of all, I think more broadly, I really do think it's important for us to learn the tradition of the virtues. We've lost that, right? That has not been passed on. So even the best of us Catholics, most of us, you know, never got immersed into that tradition. So what ends up happening is I don't really know what I need to aim for. I don't know how to get better. And so that's what I hope the book does, is to kind of map out, here are all the virtues. And it is like an examination of conscience when you start studying this stuff, you know, and then it gives you something to shoot for. So now let's say you got a particular virtue you're working on. Let's say, I don't know, you have a disposition to always want your way. And so when you're with your friends, your colleagues at work, or your family, and they're deciding what movie we're going to watch tonight, or what restaurant we're going to go out to eat, you typically try to steer it, like to say, okay, I'm actually just going to say, where do you want to go? And okay, it's not my favorite one, but I'll go there. Like, it's a simple, small, tiny little thing to deny yourself the restaurant you prefer to go to and go where they want to go to. But if you struggle with always wanting your way, like it's a great moment of like trying to go after a virtue. That's that effort part of it. And then you keep practicing that over and over until maybe over the course of a few months, maybe over the course of a few decades, you start to notice, I don't care about what restaurant I eat at anymore. I let other people, you know, decide. In other words, you've changed, and oftentimes that's how it works. You don't even notice it. It's not like you can come up with this plan. Okay, in 3 weeks, 3.5 weeks during Lent, I'm going to get this new virtue. You know, it's a mysterious, gradual dying to yourself, and then you wake up one day going, oh, I used to always react that way, and I noticed I didn't react that way today.
That's such a beautiful aspect of the spiritual life, if lived, right, with daily prayer, daily resolutions. Well, Michael asks a question. That he says, which one is the most important of all the virtues?
Oh, okay. So now this book is on what we call the Cardinal Virtues. So those are the natural virtues revealed. They're not revealed to us by Scripture. They are in Scripture, but Aristotle and Plato, philosophers just could see
reason
it.
Tells us.
We don't need grace to possess these virtues to a degree. They're not infused in us. The grace is perfectum, but we can. There are many great atheists that live these virtues to a certain extent, right? Faith, hope, and charity are the greatest virtues, and charity is the greatest of them all. But I think maybe the question might be among these, which is the greatest? I'll put it this way: which is most important? Maybe what we need the most today is not the one people would often say, oh, we need more courage, or we need more temperance and self-control. I think we lack prudence in our world, and there's a reason it's always listed first. It's known as the charioteer of the virtues. You can have a lot of courage and a lot of self-control, but if you're not going in the right direction, you actually can, lead your life and lead other people in the wrong way. So prudence is the virtue where you begin with the end in mind. You're thinking, what is the goal of life? What is it I'm trying to achieve? And then you order your life, and the other virtues come along to support that, to go toward that goal. Yeah,
you mentioned that idea of prudence, which is the idea of wisdom, right? And our culture today has a lot of knowledge. We can Google everything. We have a lot of information. It's the more than the information age, but we don't have a lot of wisdom, do we? And wisdom is really what the virtue of prudence. It's the virtue of guiding our life and our actions and our thoughts by what is right and wise. And then we become, and then you list out beautifully in your book the 4 cardinal virtues. So let's just list for everybody, what are these 4 cardinal virtues? And by cardinal virtue, we mean foundational, that all the other virtues tend to build on these virtues, right? The cardinal virtues. Yeah,
and maybe I'll tell a little story on how they work together. So years ago, my son Paul, that had just launched to college this last week, I remember taking him to Rome, and I was showing him some art, and in the airplane we're going to look at
you tell the story in the book.
I tell the story, yeah. And so there's some beautiful pieces of art about the cardinal virtues, and he asked me, what's a cardinal virtue? And my heart sinks. I'm like, okay, I teach this all the time, but how do I explain it to a 9-year-old kid? And I said, all right, Paul, so if we have to go to the Vatican Museums with the group and we have to be there at 8:30 and we're 15 minutes away at the hotel, when should we leave? He said, we leave by 8:15. Okay, good, yeah, 15 minutes. That's prudence. You're thinking beginning of the end in mind. But let's say on the way there's this big rainstorm, it's really cold and you get tired and you don't want to go through the rain. You might be tempted to just say, well, let's just stay at home. Well, no, you need courage to go do hard things. So we got to persevere through this difficulty in this storm. Or you could, be on the way to the Vatican Museum, beautiful sunny day, and there's a gelato stand offering free unlimited gelato. And I'm really attracted to that pleasure of the taste of gelato. So I need a virtue to moderate my attraction to pleasure. And that's called temperance, so to keep me on the right path. And then, or I could just say, I've been to the Vatican Museum a couple times. I don't think I want to take the people this year. And Paul says, well, that wouldn't be fair. That's right, because the people on the trip paid to go to the Vatican Museum. I need to get them there, So that's justice. I fulfill my responsibilities to others. I'm giving them their due. But, all of these virtues, you see how they work together. I need to begin with the end in mind with prudence. I need courage and temperance to keep me through the difficulty or avoid distractions of pleasure here on the side. And I need to fulfill what God is calling me to do in every situation. So these aren't just like random 4 little virtues. They actually are there to help us to give the best of ourselves to others.
Yeah, and they really provide a foundation for living well. I mean, this is what I love about your book, Ted, and this topic, and what Pope Benedict said. If we're not living these virtues, it's not like, we're missing some ancient Greco-Roman habit or disposition. We're actually making a mess of our lives, aren't we? If we don't live justice, we don't have good friendships, do we? If we don't live courage and temperance, then we become slaves to all kinds of things, fear and to pleasure. And so let's just talk about how to pursue happiness, it's really important to pursue the virtues. There's a built-in motivation here, isn't there?
I mean, that's what Aristotle brings out, right? Like, what is the happy life? And Aquinas asks the same question, in what does happiness consist? Now, Aquinas brings in God, right? So we ultimately need friendship with God. But, Aristotle points out that it's ultimately, we're as human persons, unlike the animals, we're made for friendship. And we need the virtues to live those friendships well. And that's where we're going to be happy, when we fulfill who we are. But I loved what you said there about when I'm just not trained in the virtues, then I'm just given in to my own passions, desires, emotions, and those are all over the place, right? My life becomes dependent on, did the Cubs win? Because I pour my life into following sports, or does this girl like me? Or did I get a raise, money? These are external things that I can't control. Yeah. But no matter what happens on the outset of my life, the virtuous person is able to navigate those trials and dangers and sorrows and difficulties and disappointments that come up in life. And so virtue really does help us to love, and we're made for love. That's where we will find our happiness.
It is indeed. And I hope that this has been an encouragement for you to kind of just reflect more deeply on this ancient and very important topic of virtue that's a really key part of our Catholic tradition, and yet we've lost this idea of virtue in modern culture, which is probably why modern culture is seeing record depression, drug abuse, suicide, unhappiness. It's because we've lost the art of living well, as Dr. Sri has mentioned. And so I want to recommend for everybody, again, you can get this at Catholic.market, our e-commerce store, The Art of Living by Dr. Edward Sri. I highly recommend this book. It's an easy read. As you can tell from this interview, if you know Dr. Sri, he uses beautiful examples from life for you to connect with the bigger ideas and the theology behind it. And so I really encourage you to get The Art of Living Well and share this with others. This is a great book to share as well. And I just want to encourage you on that. And I also want to let you know that next week, we're going to have Dr. Ben Akers, the Executive Director of Formed and a professor here at the Augustine Institute, is going to join me for a question answer. That's one of our more popular topics here. I know all of you love to just take in and give us your questions on all kinds of different topics. And so we're going to have the next week's show will be dedicated to your questions. And I look forward to having Ben Akers on the show. And I want to thank all of you who practice the virtue of generosity by supporting us through the Mission Circle. So, for just $10 or more a month, you can become a monthly donor to the Augustine Institute, support our mission. We are grateful, and let me tell you, we want to practice the virtue of gratitude, which Dr. Sri talks about in this book, with all of you in the Mission Circle. We're grateful for your support. Thank you, and especially thank you, Ted, for joining and giving us the time. This has been a terrific conversation.
Thanks for having me. God bless.
It's a joy. God bless you.